We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Andrew back on Liberty Nation Radio. We're continuing our conversation with Dave Patterson, Liberty Nation's national security correspondent. Earlier we were talking about the mythology that surrounds the United States and its position in European peacekeeping. But I want to move on to what we just touched on, which is, what does a peace deal look like in Ukraine? And you mentioned that there's no way that Russia will go back to pre-2014 when it annexed Crimea. That's not going to happen. And I think in reality, Dave, any territory that Russia holds today, that will have to be the starting point of any peace deal, whether Ukraine likes it, whether European allies like it or not. Because I don't see why Russia, Vladimir Putin, would give back the territory that they've seized so far. I don't think there's anything. Am I missing something? Is there something that can impel Russia to give back that land that they've taken?
I think you're right. I think that they might give up some of the land which would be too expensive to renovate after. Sure. I mean, that's just pure rubble. And there's that possibility. But more importantly, President Trump sees this as a much broader transaction. This is not just Ukraine and giving back or holding or whether there'll be troops there. I think President Trump sees this as a much more global issue, in that he has at his disposal, we find now, many more sticks in sanctions, and could, in fact, with the United States liquid natural gas capability, totally take Russia, totally is too strong a term, but take Russia out of that market and make it very difficult for them, as well as looking at Iran and explaining to Iran that there are going to be no more drones, one more drone, and Esfahan is a goner. Mm. And these are the kinds of things that I think Trump sees. I mean, I don't want to talk about for him because, but it appears to me that this is where his head is. And I think that's how you go into these negotiations. You can't narrow them down so that you only have two options or one option in order to negotiate. It has to be a much broader negotiating table with a lot more issues on it there's give and take.
Yeah, no Hobson's choice, I think. It's offering the Hobson's choice. You're not really offering anything at all. Now, there's a lot of noise in my neck of the woods in the UK, and Prime Minister Keir Starmer, he's talking about sending British troops to Ukraine this is presumably after a peace deal has been reached, as a peacekeeping force.
I think, quite frankly, that it can't be just British soldiers. It has to be as Hegseth, recommended, that it has to be a multinational force. It has to be non-NATO, and it cannot come under the Article 5. An attack on one is an attack on all. And so I think that if you think about this in terms of just British troops, well, I think that many of your points are exactly spot on. But on the other hand, if you think about it in terms of a broader and more diverse, if that's the good word, group of troops, I think that, because what it does is it spreads the equities, and so that now, if Russia would do anything untoward, then they have a problem with not just the UK, but a number of other countries. I think that you would get, certainly Poland would provide troops. I think that the Baltics would, and France and Germany, that's a tough one. I'm never sure that they're actually in the world.
Well, France, President Emmanuel Macron, he recently invited European leaders to a summit to discuss a response to Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. And how did that go?
What, how would you expect it to go? Everybody has a different idea, and I don't think from what I can understand, there was no uniform view coming out. But their purpose was not necessarily to come up with any sort of grand solutions. Their purpose was to say, "Oh dear, what's going to happen to us? We're being cut out of these discussions." That was the purpose of the meeting, and the fact is that, and this may sound kind of internationally hubris, but does Trump and Zelensky and Russia really need to have representatives from other European nations kibitzing or interfering or offering suggestions during these negotiations? I doubt it, and I think that Trump sees it as a distraction more than a help.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about how President Trump's spoken with Vladimir Putin and then spoke with Vladimir Zelensky. And it does seem that for the last 3 years of war, nobody's really made an effort to try and find out what each side wants. There's I believe the sociologist Rogers, I can't remember his name. It's not Mr. Rogers, although Carl Rogers, that's it. And there's the Rogerian method of conflict resolution that is widely adopted by the UN and essentially most organizations that seek to temper violence between nations. And the principle behind that being, for those who aren't familiar with it, is that you find out, you have one side state clearly what it wants, and then you have the other side put back what they've heard, and that way to parrot back what they've heard, and then they do the same in reciprocation. So each side fully understands precisely what each side wants, and that hasn't happened in the last 3 years. A final question for you, Dave: why hasn't it happened?
So what I hear you saying is, why hasn't this Rogerian methodology? It was part of his psychology and psychiatric practice, actually. Why hasn't that worked? And it's simple. It's not a negotiation. It's simply a trust building opportunity, but it's not a negotiation. If I tell you what I really want, oh my gosh, you would now have the advantage. Why would I continue? Now I know what you want, and you know what I want, and so that we're at loggerheads, and it's to kind of give you some background. I actually have my degree is in counseling psychology, and one of my internships was at the California Medical Facility outside of Vacaville, which is a prison. And you would have Juan Corona, the serial killer. You had a variety of very famous criminals, and try that with them. So let me hear what you really want. Well, I want out. Well, okay, got it. But I think that it's somewhat a far afield, but nonetheless, the idea is the Rogerian approach to things. And I think that you're exactly right about the way in which the Biden administration would go about these things, which was very similar. But I craft their ideas a little bit differently. And if I'm real nice to you, will you be real nice to me? And of course, we know how that's worked out. And the Trump approach is not like that at all. I mean, when Hegseth said it is unrealistic that Ukraine will become part of NATO, oh my goodness, people back in the United States said, oh my gosh, he's giving away the negotiating position. And no, it's a different dynamic. So I put that out there, and you say something that I don't like, and I take it away. Okay, no, tomorrow they're going to be part of NATO. I'm sorry, we're not going to go. We're not going down that road. I offered you something. It was an olive branch, and you dismissed it and rejected it, but now it's back on the table. And, so it's a little bit different, and it's certainly proven effective for Donald Trump in the past. So I don't bet against him.
Wise words. Dave Patterson, thanks ever so much for joining us.
You bet. Happy to be with you, Mark, always.
And that's all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I've been your host, Mark Angelides. I'd like to thank our guests today, Andrew Moran and Dave Patterson, and of course you, the listeners at home, for taking the time to join us. Please do remember, Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.